Hello, my most amazing artists. Today we are going to be finishing our apple still lives. Hopefully we'll be finishing them. If we need to take some time next week, we will. You should have your background finished with your plate and your tablecloth. If that is not complete, you will need to complete that immediately and as quickly as you can and set it off to the side while you work on your apples. I will show you a picture of a bird's eye view of some apples, because that is what we're doing today. You should have an apple on your table, and if you look directly above it and look at the top of the apple, that is what a bird's eye view is. It's like flying in the air and looking down. So what you're going to do is you are going to take this apple template, and you are going to take your painted papers from last week, and you are going to flip them over to the back. And you are going to trace the apple template. Now it should just barely fit. And if it does, that's fine. If you want to draw your own circles, that's okay too. I just made a template so everyone could get some perfect circles. Because when you look at an apple from above, it is a perfect circle. The top of it creates a perfect circle. So I'm just tracing those. And you do not have to use every color that you painted last week. If you don't want to have 4 apples in your picture, you don't have to use 4 apples. You could use 2, you could use 3. Don't do just 1. I would do at least 2 or 3. But you do not have to do 4. If you don't want to use all of your painted paper, that is fine. You will give me the ones that you don't use at the end of class. That way, if there was anybody who is absent, we can have some for them. Now, you're going to cut these out. It's important to trace the template on the back so that you don't mess up the front painted side. So I'm going to cut this out, and I will have a bin for scrap paper. So just cut this out. If it's a little bit rough, that's okay. You do want it to be rounded, so cut it out as best as you can, but it's okay if it doesn't cut out perfectly. And once I cut these out, we are going to be using oil pastels to add more detail, because right now we just have flat painted shapes. They don't really look like apples. From a bird's eye view, you would see the stem in the middle of the apple, and usually there's like a rounded part in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that. We're also going to be adding highlights and shadows. So now that I have my apple, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of take some oil pastels and create the top of my apple. If you have to peel the paper back, that is fine with me. Just be sure it goes in the trash can and not left at your table, the floor, or the oil pastel bucket. So when I look at the apple, I can see that there's like sort of a middle part to the apple. So I'm just going to kind of draw that, and I'm going to draw the stem. Okay, so there's my stem. I can also see that the apple has some different color changes. So if I wanted to add, like some detail, my apple may have some color changes. I could do that and make it look more like an apple instead of just one solid color. So look at your apple and see what you see on there. Also, there's going to be some highlights. A highlight is where the light is shining down on the apple and you see a lighter color. So we're going to use a white oil pastel to show the highlights. And usually there's like 1 or 2 curved sections. So if you just draw a straight line, it's not going to look 3-dimensional. So I'm going to do that with all of my apples and draw from observation. Look at the apple at your table and draw what you see. Sometimes the highlight is just like a little dot. And when I'm done, I'm going to take my apples and I'm going to glue them onto my plate. Okay? So you have to come up with a good composition. How do you think this is going to look? You might have 3 apples. It's always nice to overlap. If you do your apples like this, it's not really a great composition. You could have 1 apple sitting on the table if you want, and a couple in the plate. You could put them all together, but I would encourage you to sort of overlap them and have them fit on the plate. It's okay if you don't see all of them, but if you really like the way that your plate looks, you may only want to put 2 on the plate and put 1 on the table. You are the artist. So I'm not going to glue them down because this is not my background paper. This is a person in 4th grades, and I don't want to mess up her project. But you want to arrange your apples before you actually glue them down to make sure that you have a good composition. Now, when you've glued them down, and again, I'm not going to draw on here, but you're going to add shadows. So look at how the apple, as it sits on your table, casts a shadow. Basically, a shadow is the light's shining down in the form of the apple is creating a shadow. So you would take a blacker brown oil pastel and you would create a shadow. A shadow does not go all the way around. You usually cannot see it all the way around. You're going to see it like in one section. You could also add a shadow for your plate. But here's what you're going to do. If the shadow of your plate is on this side, then the shadow of your apples would be on this side too. Your shadow, again, is not going to go all the way around. It's usually just one edge. And if you look, this all still looks kind of flat. The shadow is what's really going to make your art look three-dimensional and look like apples sitting on a plate. So, I've added shadows, and if you'll look, I used brown so it just wasn't so... Black is going to be very contrasting. So I chose brown. You can kind of play around with it. If you use brown first and don't like it, you could always color over it with black. So I used brown, and if you notice, I only added the shadow around about a quarter or a third of my plate. And I had it kind of be really thin, and then my line bubbles out just a little bit to a thicker line right here, and then it goes back in, it tapers back into a thin line. So then I added a shadow around these apples in a similar area. So this is like the bottom right. Notice I have the bottom right here has a shadow. The bottom right of this apple has a shadow. So all of your apples will typically cast a shadow. I probably could have added a little bit of a shadow right here under my yellow one. But I've got a shadow under all apples and my plate, and they never go all the way around. If you do your shadow all the way around, it's not going to be accurate. Also, my shadow goes all the way up to my apple, all the way up to my plate, and it's thick enough to where I can see it. If I were to just do this, and I'm going to draw on my paper, let me show you, and just do one line, it's not really going to look like a shadow. I really need to make that line kind of be thin and come out and get a little bit thicker. And take your time in coloring that in. It can be thin on the edge, but like up here on the edge it could be thin, but in the middle it should come out and be a little bit thicker. So I'm just adding black so you can see what black would look like. You could also do black and brown. It's up to you. Black is going to be very contrasting, and so it will make it pop a little bit more. Kind of got that, kind of made it and got that a little bit too thick, but it's okay. All right, so I'm going to hold this up again, and you can see how the black really makes it contrast more. This one really pops out. So I thought I made an but actually it makes it look really three-dimensional. So maybe my shadow should be a little bit thicker. I'm not scribbling on my shadow. It should be a solid shape. All right, that is all.